What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with a response video. Now, granted, I did have this video posted a few weeks ago, but I accidentally deleted it whenever I was trying to fix something on my YouTube. So, basically, I'm redoing the video, but comes at a perfect time because this is also in response to Necrotic Nick from the Thralls of Metal, who did his list for this topic, and that is gateway metal albums for non-metalheads. Because, you know, what better topic to talk about for this than, you know, trying to get non-metalheads into metal, because the world could use some more metalheads. So, unlike Nick's video, I am going to include some popular bands because I feel like to get a non-metalhead into metal, you kind of gotta go with some of the stuff that's very popular and wide-reaching. Otherwise, playing for them too many underground things in the beginning can maybe throw some people off. I know I've had experiences where I've tried to get non-metalheads into metal, and I started with the underground stuff, and it didn't work. So, there are a couple of quote-unquote underground stuff, but most of this list is going to feature some very popular bands. So without further ado, let's get started with probably the most important one out of them all, Black Sabbath Paranoid. I mean, 1970, the same year as the debut, though I say Paranoid for me, out of the early Black Sabbath stuff, is definitely the most accessible for obvious reasons because of the big three hits: War Pigs, the title track, and Iron Man. So pretty much immediately with those songs, you're going to hook a non-metalhead into the genre immediately, especially if they're just fans of classic rock. They should know these songs. But then you got some deep cuts on here like Hand of Doom, Electric Funeral, Fairies Wear Boots, and even the instrumental Rat Salad. Like, top to bottom, a perfect album, and it came early on in metal's origins, 1970. So, for obvious reasons, for the big three hits, but also pretty much the whole album, I could see this hooking a non-metalhead who's curious about the genre. I'd say this is an important stepping stone for that individual going forward. So yeah, Black Sabbath Paranoid. Next up, we get into another big popular one, and we fast forward to the early 80s with 1982's Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast. Of course, if you're going to recommend an Iron Maiden album for a non-metalhead, I would say Number of the Beast is the perfect starting point. Granted, the album cover can maybe turn somebody away, especially if they're a religious person, but musically speaking, I would say some of the most accessible stuff Iron Maiden ever did. And of course, kind of like Paranoid, you got the big three hits: the title track, Run to the Hills, and in my personal opinion, the greatest metal song ever written, Hallowed Be Thy Name. But you get some other great tracks like Invaders, Children of the Damned, The Prisoner, 22 Acacia Avenue, really top to bottom, and even the bonus track Total Eclipse is really, really good too. So, I would say Iron Maiden is an important band as a gateway for a non-metal fan to come into the genre because you got great musicianship, great production value, but most importantly, and especially of all, Bruce Dickinson's vocals. I mean, arguably the greatest metal singer of all time. Long debate, I know. You could make the argument Bruce is the greatest, but there's other people you could debate being the greatest. But regardless, this is an important album, I'd say, that could hook a non-metalhead. Also in 1982, we get from another very important band, and that's Judas Priest, Screaming for Vengeance. So, kind of like Iron Maiden, if you're going to get somebody who's not into metal into Judas Priest, I would say it has to be Screaming for Vengeance. Pretty much because of the song, You've Got Another Thing Coming. I mean, that's still one of the biggest 80s hits of all time. But also, Electric Eye, the title track, Devil's Child, Riding on the Wind, Take These Chains. Again, this is another one, top to bottom, that's just perfect. One of the best Judas Priest albums out there, and of course what I'd say helps for a non-metalhead to get into Priest, similar to Maiden, great musicianship, great production value, but most importantly in this case, Rob Halford's vocals. Another argument could be made that he's the greatest metal vocalist of all time. It's definitely, like, for me, like a three-legged race between Rob Halford, Bruce Dickinson, and Ronnie James Dio for the greatest metal singer of all time. But regardless as to who you do think is the greatest, you can't deny Halford's powerful voice. I mean, they do call him the metal god for a reason, and this album, despite not sober at this point, he still belts it out and puts on a killer performance, and the lead work on the guitars, the riffs, mwah. Can't recommend this album enough. Now we fast forward to 1987, and this is going to be a bit of an oddball, but I think if you want to get a non-metalhead into metal, but you want to try and get them into, say, power metal or even progressive metal, I would say this is like a good meeting, like a good middle ground album, and that is Savatage, Hall of the Mountain King. I mean, the best Savatage album, 1987, recorded out of, I think it was recorded at More Sound. I'm not entirely sure about that. But regardless, I mean, this is a monumental album, kind of like in that early developing stage of both power metal and, more importantly, progressive metal, because the songwriting structures on here are very proggy, despite not, like, super long songs. Hell, the longest track is like nearly 6 minutes, and that's the title track. But still, I would say this is a very good album because it kind of has a bit of like that, like, raise your fist in the air party vibe to it, but with great songwriting, great musicianship, and John Oliva on vocals, who's, in my opinion, a very underrated vocalist. And of course, the guitar work of his younger brother Chris, may he rest in peace. But yeah, I mean, other tracks on here like Beyond the Doors of the Dark, White Witch, Devastation, 24 Hours Ago, top to bottom once again, this is one of the best prog metal albums ever recorded, and kind of like a proto-power metal album too, but with lots of ties to classic metal, especially the new wave of British heavy metal era. So yeah, definitely check this out. Now we fast forward 3 years to 1990, as I'm sure Necrotic Nick's going to be happy I'm going to recommend this one, and that is Pantera, Cowboys from Hell. 1990, one of the best albums that came out that year. Now, I could have went with really any Pantera album from the 90s, however, with Pantera kind of bordering at times a little bit on extreme metal, I decided to go with an album that was kind of like a middle ground album between classic metal fans and extreme metal fans, but in terms of trying to get a non-metalhead into Pantera, I would say this is the album to get them into, because it's not as abrasive as the remainder of their catalog to come, but it's still got plenty of balls, plenty of weight and heaviness to it. The title track that starts it off is a staple. Primal Concrete Sledge, Psycho Holiday, Cemetery Gates Domination, The Sleep, Art of Shredding, top to bottom. It's just brilliance right here. And I know a lot of people out there do not like Pantera, and I still don't understand why. I really don't get it, but yeah. But I would say, as far as what Pantera album I would say is the easiest one to get into, it is this. And also, not just because of the amazing riff writing and lead work from Dimebag Darrell, the great rhythm work from Rex Brown and Vinnie Paul, but Phil Anselmo's vocals. Little more melody on this album than he had on future Pantera albums, where he was just mostly very aggressive. But like here, you get some really cool melodic vocals, especially on tracks like The Sleep and Cemetery Gates especially. But yeah, also productions, amazing. Terry Date is the fucking man. But yeah, Cowboys from Hell, Pantera, I would say is a great kind of middle ground between classic metal and extreme metal that could bring in a non-metal fan into metal as a whole. Now we fast forward 1 year after Cowboys from Hell, and you can't try to get a non-metalhead into metal without bringing up Metallica, and of course, it's the Black Album. I know, most divisive album in the history of metal, but I don't give a shit. This album is amazing, and it's a very important, I would say, out of all of the albums, maybe sans Paranoid, this would be another big one to easily bring a non-metal fan into metal, because it's Metallica. Even if you're not a metalhead, you should know who Metallica is. And of course, you know, the big two hits, Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters, are easy songs to get into for different reasons, but the lesser hits are fantastic, you know, Sad But True, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam. But the deep cuts, the remainder of this album, has a ton of deep cuts, you know, like Holier Than Thou, Don't Tread on Me, Through to Never, Of Wolf and Man, God That Failed, My Friend of Misery, and The Struggle Within. All great songs, amazing riffs, solid leads, solid drums, great bass work, and great production. And I would say, if you're a stickler for production in your music, nothing better than this. I would argue, in terms of all rock music in the analog era, from, say, the beginning of rock and roll through the early 90s, this is the best sounding analog recording ever. This is right before everything became digital. So I would say the easiest album next to Paranoid to get you into metal would be the Black Album. Hell, part of the reason why I got into metal was thanks to an album like this. So yeah, definitely an important gateway. Agree or disagree on whether you think it's good or whatever. I still think anybody who thinks it's bad is high off their ass. That's just me, of course. But yeah, the Black Album, Metallica, can't do a list like this without it. Alright, so now we fast forward 5 years later. Now, this is where we're going to kind of run into a bit of a theme, like getting in, like non-metalheads getting into metal that are from different crowds. Let's say this person is a fan of gothic music that's not a metalhead. Well, I would say there's no better band or album to ease gothic fans, whether they're fans of gothic music or just ladies. I would say this is also a good one for the ladies to get into, and that is Typo Negative's October Rust. I could have went with Bloody Kisses, but I wanted to go with one that I felt was a little bit more accessible, because after all, October Rust has some like lush, lavish songs like Love You to Death, which is arguably the greatest sex song of all time. Maybe also even songs like My Girlfriend's Girlfriend and Praise of Bacchus, and Be My Druidess, great stuff. Redwater, Christmas Morning, Cinnamon Girl, Wolf Moon, Haunted. Just, again, top to bottom, I would say if this listener is a fan of gothic music or is a lady that wants to get into more lush songs with lush production, this is an easy one to get into here. And also, of course, for the ladies, because Peter Steele, I'll admit, he was a handsome fella, and the ladies loved him. So there you go. So I would say this is a good gateway for the ladies, as well as the gothic crowd that can get into metal. This is no better album in terms of accessibility to get them into the genre than this right here. October Rust, Typo Negative. Now we fast forward a long time. We go 9 years later, so we're fast forwarding to 2005, and I actually have two albums from 2005 that I think could easily bring in non-metalheads into metal for different reasons. First, Avenged Sevenfold, City of Evil. Of course, I would say in terms of the more modern era of metal, I would argue the biggest gateway band into the genre is Avenged Sevenfold. Hell, I'll even admit, after Metallica, the next band that got me further down the rabbit hole of metal was Avenged Sevenfold, and I've talked about how I got into them many times, so I'll spare you the details. But I would say in terms of, again, more accessible, but still having a lot of depth and heaviness to it, I would say City of Evil. Of course, three big hits, Beast and the Harlot, Backcountry, and Seize the Day. All different songs. Like Beast and the Harlot's kind of like a thrashy, Nawabum, power metal inspired track. Backcountry, that more kind of classic metal vibe. Seize the Day, their almost balladish track. But everything else has a ton of heaviness, like almost borderline prog at times, especially with the more longer, bombastic songs like Strength of the World and MIA. But amazing lead work. The drum work on this album's absolutely insane. Rest in peace, Jimmy the Rev Sullivan. And even the vocals, yeah, M. Shadows, it's a love-hate relationship with his vocals. I liked his vocals from, say, like the White Album or Nightmare back, whereas lately his vocals haven't been as strong, but they're not terrible. But I would say in terms of like his best clean performance, it's a toss-up between this and the previous album, Waken to Fallen, but Waken to Fallen had more of the screaming vocals. But this album was pretty much all cleans. So I would say in terms of accessibility in the more modern day of metal, for non-metalheads to get into metal, can't go wrong with Avenged Sevenfold City of Evil. Plus it's an amazing album too, the best A7X album out there. So yeah, if you haven't checked this album out in a long time, or if you're a non-metalhead that's curious, definitely give it a listen. And then the other one from 2005, and this is the second to last album. Now, here's where it's going to be a little bit interesting, because this and the following album that I'm going to talk about are both, I would say, easier to get into for the more extreme side as well as prog. And first off, when it comes to slowly kind of getting into death metal, I would say no better band than Opeth, and I went with Ghost Reveries. So that's the different cover, there's the actual cover. But I would say Ghost Reveries, for me, in terms of the death metal era of Opeth, I would say this is the most accessible one, because not as abrasive, but still filled with brutality, but with beautiful melodies, lush melodies at times. And of course, Michael Ockerfeld's vocals, he sometimes croons, and I think this could be another one for the ladies, because Michael Ockerfeld, I'll admit, is kind of a handsome fella, and a hell of a crooner, just like Peter Steele. When it comes to death growls, he's one of the best as well, but also like great like atmospheric leads, amazing drum performance, keyboards to kind of enhance the more melodrama behind it, and the bass work, like top-notch bass work, and great production too. So I would say in terms of like getting non-metalheads into a bit of the more extreme side as well as a progressive edge, I would say Ghost Reveries Opeth would be a good starting point on all fronts. And then the final album that I would recommend to a non-metalhead, and this is kind of similar to Opeth, but now more into almost black metal territory with prog, and that is an album that came out in 2016, one of my favorites from the last decade, Borknagar Winter Thrice. I would say this would be a great gateway for a non-metalhead, because the melodies are just so powerful on here. The vocals, even the black metal screams, are very powerful, but they're kind of minimal compared to the clean vocals. And you get technically four different vocalists on here. Three of them throughout the whole album, and one guest on a couple tracks. But like Winter Sorg, he's got like great cleans that kind of remind me of James Hetfield from Metallica and Matt Heafy from Trivium. Then you got Lars, the keyboardist, who's kind of a little bit higher up in the register, kind of like the middleman between Winter Sorg and then the third vocalist, ICS Vortex, who has that more operatic, almost Bruce Dickinson, Ronnie James Dio style to him. And even his high screams on like the latest Borknagar album were very strong too. And then the guest vocalist, Garm from Ulver and formerly of Arcturus, doing the title track and Terminus, he definitely has a more somber, clean vocal, which definitely fits beautifully with this album. But yeah, of course, great guitar work, drum work's phenomenal. The keyboards, again, kind of acting as more of a melodramatic embellishment in the background. The bass work's really top-notch, but the thing that I would say could sell a non-metalhead into metal is the vocals. And great vocal harmonies, too, which I would say would be a great gateway, too. So I would argue Borknagar Winter Thrice would be a great one in terms of slowly for a non-metalhead to maybe get into black metal, because they'll hear this and then they'll be curious like, oh, Dark Throne, what's that? So, yeah, Borknagar Winter Thrice. And that pretty much does it for my list. Thank you, Nick, for reminding me, essentially, to do this again, because I originally did do this video a month ago, but I accidentally deleted it like an idiot because I was trying to delete the original upload of the Metallica ranking to edit it to fix something, and I accidentally deleted the original video, and I had a completely different list, but thankfully Nick picked up the pieces and helped create the thread himself somewhat, and now here I am giving my list. So that is my 10 albums that I think would be gateways to metal for non-metalheads, but obviously for different reasons. But what did you guys think of my list? Let me know in the comments section below. If you're out there and you make videos, make a response and tag Thralls of Metal, especially since Nick basically picked up the pieces and started it up again. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Horns high. See you guys soon. Wake up.
This is interesting.
And wow. I can go ahead and confirm.
I was the revealer. I flip Levi's card. There's my revealer card.
I was hoping this would happen. Okay.
The heck happened?
Alright.
What in the
world? God.
Misappropriated.
Okay, I was the robber, and I took Seth's revealer.
What the heck?
So Seth and I are safe. Bad news for everyone else.
And I'm a prince again,
I literally was squinting because I'm like, that looks like a revealer card, but wait, I'm the revealer.